Okay, we can start. Thank you everyone for joining us online for this series of lectures, Global Minds for Ukraine, produced by the Kyiv School of Economics. My name is Timothy Brig. I'm the rector of Kyiv School of Economics and the researcher in this institution. Today, I'll have a bit longer introduction than usual because we have a very special group of guests today, and this lecture is actually quite long overdue. The thing is that today we have Richard Rogers, who is professor of new media and digital culture at University of Amsterdam, and he was very kind and very generous. Maybe 4 or 5 months ago, I don't remember, he reached out to us and he offered his support, and he suggested to conduct this lecture, basically to donate his time to our students, and we are very grateful. Unfortunately, we were not able to accommodate his lecture earlier, but now finally we have Richard, and he's not alone. He has the whole crew with him. We also are happy to have Kamila Koronska. She's a researcher and research officer in the study of misinformation and media studies at University of Amsterdam, and Maria Lompe. She is a PhD candidate in science and technology studies at Copernicus University. And I think this is an excellent idea to have the whole group here. It can be very inspiring and useful for our students, to learn how people work together in groups to produce science and knowledge. And finally, final bits of my introduction, I just want to say that this group represents Dutch and Polish academic institutions, and both of these countries have been very supportive of Ukraine. Ukrainian academia is very grateful to these countries and scientific and educational institutions. I myself studied in Utrecht University. I attended a master program in sociology there. I have a lot of colleagues, a part of my heart is in the Netherlands, and I look forward to come back there and to meet all my friends again. And, I'm just very happy to have this group of researchers with us today. Now I will pass the word to Richard, Maria, and Kamila. And then after the lecture, our students will moderate questions and answers. So thank you again, and I look forward to hear all about your research. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. We're very, very pleased to be with you today. We're going to talk a little bit about a project that we have undertaken right at the beginning of the Russian aggression against Ukraine, carried out research for about a month and a half after that on controversial narratives, as the subtitle reads, about Ukrainian war refugees. And then in a very, very specific space in Polish language social media. And it's on 3 platforms in particular, Telegram, Facebook, and Twitter. And so what I'll do is I'll introduce the project, the research, and then I'll turn the floor over. So what I want to do is mention I think maybe one of the major highlights of this work, and that is that we've developed a new methodology. And this methodology combines digital research methods with open source intelligence. And so digital research methods in this particular case concerns data collection from querying social media platforms, so either APIs or using scrapers or using the commercial dashboards, querying them, collecting data, and then analyzing that data in 2 different ways. So in digital research methods, we analyze the data using network analysis, and using open source intelligence, we analyze the data for verification. So trying to verify the sources. And so we've combined these two techniques in order to do a couple of things. The first thing is to, as you can see, is to map, or first locate and then map the prominence of particular narratives about Ukrainian war refugees in Poland and in Polish social media. So what is being said about them? And we're mapping in particular controversial ones. So this is the first thing. And then the second one, and this relies more on also open source intelligence, we're locating and mapping what we call post-truth spaces. And this is a term that has been around for a few years now, but what our contribution is empirical. So we're able to actually identify these spaces and on the basis of particular characteristics of them. And the characteristics are that they constitute particular clusters in network analysis that then the sources and or the accounts are themselves difficult to verify, whereas other sources and accounts in other clusters are easy to verify. So this is our empirical contribution to the notion of a post-truth space. So the project started by reading in Polish media that after the war started and a number of refugees began coming into Poland, there were a number of accounts in Polish media, this is the sort of Polish press, that discussed a number of problematic or controversial narratives about the refugees. And so we actually were looking at whether we could find these narratives, what they are, how prominent they are. And there's a purpose behind it as well. And the purpose is to circulate information about these narratives so that they can be or debunked, pre-bunked or debunked. So pre-bunking means circulating information about these narratives so before they strike, so that one is prepared or one is aware of them. And debunking is of course to challenge these narratives and show where they come from, and maybe that they're a part of a particular political agenda, maybe they're a part of a particular foreign disinformation influence campaign, etc. So this was the purpose, and at the end of the lecture we'll come back to this question of the extent to which we actually achieved that goal. So I just want to start with the research questions. So what we were looking to answer was, first of all, to identify problematic narratives relating to war refugees or war more generally, but then war refugees in Polish language social media. So you see the platforms there. And then we wanted to look into something more platform specific. So to what extent are particular narratives are more present on certain platforms versus others. And this is a question of also a kind of platform critique, a critique about the extent to which certain platforms are sort of used more for problematic information or others are used less, etc. And then the third one was we wanted to look into who's behind these narratives. So who's spreading this? And can we actually find some kind of evidence of foreign disinformation? So whether it's sort of organized by particular states, whether we can find sort of clues about that. And then finally, we're interested also in the extent to which there's pushback against these narratives, both by the platforms, so in terms of content moderation. So are there particular narratives that are obviously absent because they're present on certain platforms and absent on others? And are there actually efforts by other users to moderate this content, to sort of push back? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn the floor over to Kamila.
I think actually to me.
Oh, to Maria. I'm going to turn the floor over to Maria.
Yeah, no worries.
Who will discuss the methodology.
Yeah, so I will explain shortly our methodology. And as Richard mentioned in the beginning, we used this two-pronged methodological approach. So on the one hand, we are using digital methods, so online research techniques. We are using natively digital data for analysis, and we're using tools developed by the DMI collective for discourse analysis in this case. And on the other hand, we are using open source intelligence. So we are using publicly available data from social media platforms. So we were able to verify signals from social media platforms and also domain verification. And so those were two complementary methodological strategies in this study. Kamila, could you please put the next slide? Yeah, okay. And next one, actually. Thanks. All right. So yeah, we started from creating the corpus of keywords and hashtags to scrape the data from social media platforms. So basically what we did was that we created a list of so-called program and anti-program keywords and hashtags, which were repeated in posts and tweets. And by program, we meant, in this case, Western narration about the war. And by anti-program, we meant pro-Russian narration. And we also use so-called two-step query analysis for Twitter to prepare hashtag corpus. So we queried Twitter API with initial base of hashtag that we created, and then we checked what other hashtags were used in the database. And then we were adding top 10 hashtags from the new database, and then we were querying one more time. So that was the process of adding new hashtag that we could find online. And then we created the corpus for each platform. So for except Telegram, because for Telegram, we choose 11 channels from which we scrape the data, because Telegram API works in different ways. So so for Telegram, the technique was a bit different. But for Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, we created the corpus of hashtags or keywords. And could you please put next slide, Kamila? So yeah, those are the channels from Telegram from which we were scraping the data, and we choose 11 channels related to war, Koronascepticism, alt-right narrations, from which we could spot kind of narrations about the war. And could you please put next slide? Yeah, and this is the corpus for Instagram, and the next one is for Twitter. So those are the corpuses for program and anti-program for hashtags, and they are pretty much the same for Instagram and Twitter. And on the next slide, we can see a corpus for, next slide, please. Yeah, this one. On this one, we can see the corpus for Facebook that we created. So this is the list of keywords that we could find on Facebook post. And that's how we created the corpus for Facebook. And as you can see from the corpus, usually we started from the default hashtags or keywords, and then we were checking what other controversial keywords or hashtags were connected to them. So for example, we were queried word Ukraine, and then we could also find many posts that were using word Ukrainization, and that's how we were finding those next keywords and hashtags. And we found many controversial narrations related to alt-right, Koronascepticism, conspiracy theories, and keywords related to those. For example, we have many keywords related to alt-right narration, which is usually about historical view about banderist or illegal stay of refugees. We found also many controversial keywords used on Facebook related to conspiracy theories about biolaboratories and Pentagon, for example. And also keywords used in pro-Russian narrations like Ukrainization or Ukrainian migration. And on the basis of these corpuses, then we queried CrowdTangle for Facebook data and Twitter API for Twitter data and Telegram API. And all the data were collected for the period of the first month of the war when we were doing this research. And then next step was to map the narrations via so-called word trees. So we used a word tree algorithm available via Forcat software. And we created the list of 69 words we queried in word tree. And basically those were keywords and hashtags that we use to collect the data. So those were the same words. And what we did was that we put all the data that we collected from 4 platforms into word tree algorithm, and we asked it to check what sentences were posted with the use of particular words that we were looking for. And we did it for all 69 keywords for 4 platforms. And on the next slide, we can see the keywords we use for word trees. As I said before, basically those were the same keywords that we used before. And on the next slide, we can see the output from forecast. So this is the word tree that we were getting back. And then we will manually check what kind of narrations appeared in the word trees. And we selected the recurring controversial narratives from each word tree, and then we created mind maps. And and then next step was to sort out the narratives with the higher engagement and create topic clusters. And we divided at the end our dataset into 7 thematic clusters. But about that, Kamila will tell you a bit more in a while. But then the very last part of our methodology was open source intelligence. And that was, in my opinion, maybe the most interesting part of it. Once we created the database with the controversial narrations and the accounts that posted them, we did actor verification. So again, we did 2 things. So first of all, we did domain verification. So we were checking platforms' own verification signals. So when the account was created and who registered it, and also source verification, like domain registration data. And we also did social media verification. So we were checking cross-link sharing behavior by plotting the network of links that were shared. And we also look for signs of artificial activity, like frequency of posting, external link profiles, the use of language in the post. And that was the last part of our methodological strategy for this study. So I think now I will hand over to Kamila, and she will present our findings.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so, Maria. I'm going to walk you through all of the findings that we got from this report. I wanted to start from a little bit of background, or to introduce a little bit of background again. So I would like to say that we started this research with this very pragmatic goal in mind. So concretely, we wanted the findings to be useful for journalists and fact checkers, but also as well for the members of the public. So we wanted to give the media workers the arguments and frameworks that they could later use for debunking the online falsehoods that they saw that were flooding Polish social media sphere there at the time and continuously to do so. But equally at the same time, we wanted the ordinary users of social media to get slightly better maybe at recognizing and reporting the disinformation. So the idea was that by telling people what are the narratives, the most popular controversial narratives currently fluctuating and being seen on social media, people would just get better at recognizing disinformation, and maybe in this way we can, sort of inoculate them and make them aware that certain narratives are they being spread, but those people who might have malicious intent. And separately to that, through these narratives, we wanted to also get a better insight into the infrastructure of what we call post-truth spaces. And it's a term that I would get back to it a little bit later and tell you a little bit more about it. But also we wanted to use the controversy mapping in order to learn a little bit about the fabric of the social. And the 7 narratives that we were able to map and find were conspiracy theories, the refugees, historical massacres, national economic insecurity topic, disease, coronavirus, and corruption. So the first 2 sets that I would like you to show are called conspiracy theories and refugees. So the conspiracy theory group, we decided that all the posts, discussions, and content that we saw that was clearly aiming to distract people from the atrocities of the war in Ukraine was pertaining or was belonging to this conspiracy theory cluster. But also we thought that the people who were posting conspiracy theories, they wanted to push an alternative version of the state of affairs. Under the refugee narrative, we have a group of communication and content that was mostly around the presence of Ukrainian refugees in Poland. And looking at these two sets, you can see that both of these narratives, they were mostly present and prominent on Telegram. We have also seen some evidence of the refugee narrative being discussed and circulating on Facebook, but to a lesser degree. For us, since we conducted this cross-platform research, that was very important finding right at the beginning, because it gave us some very preliminary conclusions about the moderation practices on Telegram versus on the Western counterparts, versus on its Western counterparts such as Facebook or Twitter. But when it comes to the very building blocks of these narratives, the main mood around the refugee narrative was, as you can imagine, the one of the scaremongering. So the subjects brought up by the discutants, they were taking part in discussing the presence of the refugees in Poland. They were mostly using the derogatory narrative about the refugees and migrants that is present also in other discussions that are currently happening. So there was, in a sense, there was nothing new there, although there was this much more sinister core to it as well, because they were trying to not only portray the Ukrainian refugees as being a threat to the Polish labor market, they were also trying to portray the Ukrainian refugees as being treacherous and maybe on a par of I don't know, like a Nazi Trojan horse that rode into this otherwise peaceful and prosperous country. And when we look at the content of the conspiracy theory messages that we found on Telegram, you can see that there are some very common and typical topics that you can say that, you know, they're typical for Kremlin influence operations. So they all borrow from these very problematic areas. They all try, or they have a power to shift or distort the discussion. So you can see that there are the topics of Western or American imperialism being discussed, that there are people introducing topics of organ trafficking, but also biological chemical weapons being created in Ukraine. There were also claims that Ukraine is a Nazi country and that the war itself is a hoax and the Ukrainians are hurting their own citizens. But although these narratives, they definitely look like they had the elements of the Kremlin propaganda, and it certainly felt to us that this is or could be Kremlin propaganda, we stopped short of making such conclusions because we couldn't de-anonymize the suspicious profiles that we saw on Telegram, and instead we just grouped these actors and we call them super spreaders, which is also something that I would explain a little bit later. The next set of narratives that we found that were really interesting as well were historical massacres and national economic security topics. So under the historical massacres group, we label all of the discussions that they were pertaining to the ethnic cleansing of Volhynia that happened between 1943 and 1945. And under the national and economic security group, we have all of the content that we saw that was mostly concerning the security of the Polish borders, the security of the Polish citizens, as well as the economic prosperity of the country. Unlike in these two previous narratives that I show you, both historical massacres and national and economic security, they both were present on all of the platforms that we look into. But unlike in the previous case, we were able to verify some of these accounts. And for example, for the national and economic security topic, we saw that it was mostly something that was discussed by far-right politicians that are very popular in the realms of the Polish internet. And that also, in a way, explains why some of these narratives, especially on Facebook, they get so much engagement, just because these politicians, they quite well known, and they have a reasonable group of followers. An interesting case pertaining to this to the historical massacres was also a Facebook group that we came across. So most of the content that belonged to this narrative came from the Facebook group that is actually still called Ukrainian is Not My Brother. So there on the group, the ethnic cleansing in Volhynia was used as one of the arguments why the Polish people shouldn't be helping Ukrainians. But interestingly, the page administrator was actually named by one of the Polish OSINT journalists, Martin Ray, and the person was subsequently sustained from work and then referred to the prosecutor. However, the page in itself, the Facebook page in question, is still up and running, and at the moment has about 50,000 followers. The last set of controversial narratives that I would like to show you, these are the disease, COVID-19, and corruption. And very much in line with historical massacres and national economic security, all these three narratives, they were present on all of the platforms that we analyze. Disease, COVID-19, were probably more present on Twitter, whereas the corruption was mostly present on Facebook. And what's the most interesting about the disease and COVID, and we certainly think it's worth mentioning, it was that these two narratives, they tap very well to the existing anti-vaxxers community. So we saw that the recent escalation in Ukraine was for some of the people another chance to once again diminish the legitimacy of the government actions that were taken in order to curb the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. And when it comes to the corruption narrative itself, so the narrative was trying mostly to promote this very opaque, symmetrist view on a conflict, whereby Ukraine and its citizens was portrayed as supporters of a Bandera, and apparently the war is something that is inherent to how the Ukraine was run as a country. So there were messages and posts that were saying that the country is corrupted in itself and that it's run by neo-Nazis. But even using the anti-program keywords, not everything that we were able to unearth with our corpus keywords was inherently bad or trying or meant to smear Ukrainians. Perhaps encouraging was the fact that on Facebook we found evidence of a narrative that we call organic pushback. So there were people who were actually trying to dispute all of this falsehood that was spreading at the time, mostly on Facebook. And for every hateful and controversial Facebook narrative that we saw, there were some people trying to dispute it. And we thought that was encouraging. So here I would like to show you a next set of findings that we have from this report. So these are the networks. And these are the results of a very simple network analysis that we done. So here you can see the Telegram networks. These networks are made of accounts and URLs that were shared subsequently by those Telegram accounts. So the edges or the connections, if you prefer, between the nodes are the user accounts on Telegram and all of the URLs, external URLs that they shared. So we think that whether that is spontaneous or motivated by cultural war, we think that whether it is spontaneous and motivated only by cultural wars or whether it's orchestrated or by malicious actors, the activity itself presented on the graph can be or is an evidence of a positive space. So you can see here that some users, some nodes are especially active, and their aim is to push and recommend other users of Telegram and show them novel social media channels, to send them to YouTube videos, to send them to those external website URLs. And we believe that it was done with the aim so they could deepen their knowledge about all of these controversial narratives that I just presented to you. One such example was website that was quite often flagged and debunked by one of the Polish fact checkers. It was called Lego Artist, but also we've seen in these networks links to Sputnik News and far-right videos. So all in all, we believe that there is a presence, or you can clearly see that there were some specific actors for whom we couldn't really verify the motives, and that's why we think that they represent this positive space. So what do we really mean by a positive space when we say that? So we think that this is a network or a knowledge infrastructure where alternative facts that are introduced mostly to challenge the mainstream media sources, and through challenging the mainstream media sources, they try to challenge the establishment. So in positive spaces, the attitudes of holding, it includes and promotes the positive spaces include and promote the attitudes that tend to explain that holding false beliefs or inaccurate beliefs is not as problematic as we may think. And another thing is that on a moral level, the participants of the positive spaces, whether they are active or passive, they don't really recognize, or they seem to bother that forming or sustaining the beliefs that are false can be damaging to societies. And in here, it was this important case, of course, of helping Ukrainians. And in practice, it means that the participants of the positive spaces, they tend to write forward and engage with content that is unverified, unchecked, and harmful, but it does align with the views. So the obsession with being informed and not lied to by establishment seems to take priority in the case over someone's faith, or actually in this case of someone's lives. And this is another example of our network findings. So we observed that actually on Twitter, there was also some evidence of the coordinated linking sharing behavior, as similar as it was on Telegram. But this was done in a sort of different method. So previously we were using Gephi, and here these networks are plotted with a program called Cortex. So similar on Telegram, so similar as on Telegram, on Twitter, we saw that there were links that were shared to other Twitter accounts as well as the YouTube channels. So you can see here that the participants of the blue and green bubbles, they were mostly posting messages with links to external sources that were mostly conservative websites. What is probably interesting is that although on Facebook we have seen controversial narratives being shared, as I mentioned to you before, we haven't really seen any evidence of coordinated link sharing. So we concluded that probably Facebook was free from this sort of positive spaces that I described to you before. And the ability, so the strength of this research was that through mapping the content into problematic narratives and then zooming in and out into these positive networks, we were able to distinguish 4 types of actors who we think participated in spreading the content. So first group are the super spreaders. These are the accounts that were mostly present on Telegram. they tend to share lots of copious links to external content. They were trying to encourage people to check YouTube videos, to read other articles on posts on social media groups and platforms. And they were injecting to these spaces this controversial narrative, trying to distract people's attentions, but also establishing new and destructive behaviors. So, for example, encouraging people to take up all of the money from their bank accounts, or start spreading other content that can warn about the presence of Ukrainians in Poland. When it comes to the second group of users, so we found on Twitter mostly that there were some actors who were, although they were posting frequently about COVID-19, disease, and historical massacres, the active participation and the active dissemination of these controversial narratives didn't really amount to a graded engagement. So the response that they got and the response from all of their followers was really minimal. Then we on Facebook, we've seen what we call internet personalities. So the people with significant reach, such as the right-wing politicians who were mostly posting about the economic security of the country, but also populists and amateur historians, at the same time satirical news sites, and novelists who felt like that they need to say something about the conflict itself. And the last fourth group of users, we call them the organic pushback users. So these were the people who either organically, because they've seen this content present somewhere on Facebook, or just intuitively, they felt like they know what the narrative that might be spread, the false narrative that might be spread. They went to Facebook and started posting and trying to alert people themselves not to fall for the misleading content and disinformation. Lastly, I would like to talk a little bit about if we managed to achieve what we actually intended with this report. So at the beginning, we said that we wanted this report to have this very pragmatic aims. So we wanted the journalists to get better and to get better at recognizing the false narratives, but also we wanted, in a way, to alert the public. So far, that report's been picked up by 3 different medias for, we believe, 3 different reasons. So for example, Press.pl, that is an online magazine that mostly writes about media, marketing, and technology. So they wrote a piece about the report, mostly focusing on the findings itself, but the narratives that we found were the most important to them. Demagog.pl is a fact-checking organization in Poland, quite prominent, and they were very keen actually to write about the report on the basis that they were sued by the owner of the Lega artist website itself. So that was the website that was mostly prominent on Telegram network. So for them, the research was useful because it boosted the credibility of the findings, and they just wanted to use it as a case to show that it's not only them that find that Lega artist website problematic. There are also other people who have found that there might be a problem with this sort of content. And then lastly, Spider's Web. It's another news site. The article was used there to feed an interview with a researcher from the Atlantic Council who predicted that the narratives about the refugees and national economic stability will be probably rising towards the end of the year. And that, of course, is for us something that to follow up and monitor and to check in the future. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Wow. No, thank you. It's fascinating research, very, very timely, very useful. I also want to say that we also, well, I teach social network analysis, usually in spring semester. So maybe I'll engage you to give a short lecture to our students about Gephi or something. But I really enjoyed it. But I want to give floor to our students. They prepared some questions and they want to ask something. So I think Oleg is ready. So please introduce yourself. And ask a question.
Hello. My name is Oleg, and you mentioned during the lecture that there is an organic pushback by readers under the provocative posts. But is there anything that the government should do or have a possibility to do to avoid further development of propaganda?
Yeah, so I think that's a very good question. And I think that's the question that people living in Poland, they ask themselves every day. Is there anything that the government can do about it? And if there's anything that they can do more about it? I'm sure that it's already been taken care of and there are institutions who are looking into that. So this is not the case that it's been only us and there are a few people who bravely go to these dark spaces online and they try to push against all the disinformation. So it's being looked into as well, but the question is whether, to what degree. But definitely there's been other kind of success stories. So people have been encouraged in multiple ways to report disinformation. And actually I was very surprised because my initial reaction was like, oh, probably that's not going to be the case. And I was very worried about it initially, but then I realized that there was really, all the media, that was the topic number one or was very high, of high importance. So the discussion is still going. So it's not like people stop talking about disinformation online. It's still a present topic.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and I have a quick follow-up question to this. To the best of my knowledge, big platforms like Facebook, they often work with local NGOs that help them to facilitate fact-checking. In Ukraine, they collaborate with some NGOs for sure. Do you think that, or have you seen in your data that this organic pushback is, let's say, primarily is a spontaneous reaction by disaggregated individuals, or are there some, journalists or professionally trained or socially engaged individuals, maybe that work in NGOs or some media? Is it even possible to detect who are these actors?
Mm-hmm. So we looked into that a little bit, and from what we've seen, it was a split between some public figures, but also some just people that we didn't know about, but you could see the name and the surname, and they did look like legit accounts. So I think it's just both. So you would have activists, NGOs, and people who remind you to push back against it on social media. But then again, it was really engaged. Like, it was really nice to see that there was also normal people, ordinary citizens, trying to alert themselves on social media not to fall for that.
Yeah,
I want to say one thing about content moderation. So you noticed in the findings that the amount of and the resonance of controversial narratives was much greater on Telegram than on Twitter and Facebook, and so that suggests that there's content moderation going on those other two platforms. Of course, it is going on, but it suggests that they're active in that space. Having said that, however, all studies indicate that the content moderation is greatest in English, followed by other sort of Western European, so like the German space, the French, etc. And as you move eastwards, that amount declines generally. it's an open question, however, so we didn't look into, I mean, we could try to, as a follow-up to compare, and this is in fact what we're planning on doing as the next project is to compare a number of Eastern European countries to see whether or not we have a similar types of narratives and a similar types of or the clear indications of the rise of a particular kind of post-truth space where the sources and the accounts are difficult to verify. So when you do the comparison across a number of countries, then there's more of a baseline, so we can tell about the extent to which there seems to be more or less content moderation going on per country, per language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, I think someone else also had a question.
Hello, my name is Andriy, and you mentioned super spreaders from Telegram among the main actors of this campaign. So it would also be interesting to, as in case of Facebook, it would be interesting to know who they are. Are they anonymous or not? And if not, are they famous public celebrities, or maybe they represent media accounts? So how does the situation differ on Telegram in this aspect?
Mm-hmm. So I would take that. So maybe it wasn't entirely clear from the presentation that I gave, but the super spreaders, I think we were mostly trying to tell that they are on Telegram, and we called them such because we couldn't de-anonymize them. We didn't know who those people or accounts were. So we haven't really seen anything of that on Facebook, and we actually, we only saw that there are controversial narratives there on Facebook, but all of the content that we saw, it was coming from the people who could be verified in one way or another, either because they were, far-right politicians or other right-wing figure, or the content was coming from this public group that I mentioned, the Ukrainian is not my brother, that's been de-anonymized by one of the OSINT journalists in Poland. In Poland. So basically, we haven't really seen any super spreaders there on Facebook.
Yeah, and just a clarification when you're saying about Telegram, because Telegrams, they have different modes. There are Telegram chats and Telegram channels that you can follow. So I assume you're talking about channels, yeah? So a lot of people can follow someone, and this someone can be, I don't know, an anonymous right-wing conspiracy theory spreader, or it can be a local NGO activist or public intellectual. Yeah, so technically it can be anyone, and people just follow this person and share and forward the messages. So if this is the case, I wonder, is it possible to trace back historically these accounts, what they did before the Russian invasion, in a way that I can assume that some of them were, again, just organic users who switched their attention to this new war, and others, maybe they were just, sort of fake accounts that perhaps were created just to highlight and spread information about Ukraine. And perhaps if we can go historically to see whether they had any activities before, let's say, February 24th, you can somehow test this hypothesis. Is this possible, do you think? Or maybe, I don't know, maybe you don't see that this is a relevant comment. Can you reflect on this?
I think it's possible, and
It is possible.
It is possible, yeah. But I'm not entirely sure that's possible for every Telegram account. So most, like that's what Maria was saying, that we looked into this long list of different Telegram channels. Some of them were just channels created for this far right wing political group in Poland.
Mm-hmm.
So they weren't really from one, obscure account from one person. But yeah, like you could of course trace back the history of that particular channel, and that existed from a long before the intensification of the war in February.
Yeah.
But we also look on some channels that were created after the war or just for the purpose of the war, right? So, yeah, that was very different. Although sometimes we were checking accounts on Twitter. So on Twitter, we were checking whether the account was created before or after the war. And if I remember correctly, we didn't really find any account that was created like after the war or just for the purpose of this. Majority of them, even if they were fake or not really trustworthy, were created before the war anyway.
Mm-hmm. But so sometimes you also could have a situation where, you know, these accounts been there for a longer period of time, but they were sharing links to the domains that were registered just after the war. So, you know, they might have been spreading information against the coronavirus restrictions previously, but with the war, they just changed the way of the mode of working.
Yeah, no, it's really, at least how people discuss Russian propaganda here. There are kind of two hypotheses / observations about some patterns, and one observation is that Russian propaganda likes to do this, you know, almost overwhelms a reader with so many alternative facts and interpretations that can actually contradict each other, but the idea that you rather overwhelm people so they stop thinking about what's happening and stop being critical about what's happening. And another hypothesis is that maybe they try out different strategies. You know, they say one thing, and if it doesn't work, they say another thing. So one hypothesis that it's about, you know, simultaneously sending a lot of noise. And another hypothesis is that it's about some evolution. They try things and change narratives. And I think your data is very valuable in this respect. Maybe you can disentangle these two effects if you can show, you know, you have such an amazing variation, the content that created on Telegram and Facebook before and specifically for the war, that you can try to compare all that. But I'm just talking out loud, and I saw that another student wanted to ask a question as well. So I will pass the microphone.
Thank you very much. My name is Alex, or Alexei, and I'm currently a law student in Sorbonne University in Paris, and therefore, like, I have a semi-legal question to you. You know, like the moderation of fake news, fake information is always somehow in conflict with the freedom of speech. And, you know, nowadays there are people who are very pro freedom of speech, such as Elon Musk, who wants, for example, who acquired Twitter and wants to make it 100% free. So you can write whatever you want. So in your opinion, how is it possible to reconciliate, you know, these two extremities of security and of freedom of speech, especially taking into account that Russian propaganda can show the moderation of pro-Russian content as to found their position that, like, Europe is not democratic, Europe does not allow for freedom of speech. What, how can we fight with that? Thank you.
I think I'll take this one. So I think there are a number of schools of thought. All right. So I think the and then you can see the schools of thought reflected in the moderation policies of various platforms. So one way of kind of thinking about this, I would say productively, is to do a kind of content moderation policy comparison. So you have one school of thought is, let's call it the purely legalistic one. So what you want to do is you want to remove only illegal content, right? There is no anything goes, by the way. I mean, you could say that that's a school of thought, anything goes, but in fact, most platforms, well, no platform has that kind of policy, because they do realize that they need to follow the laws of the land. So you see that we're only going to remove things that are sort of illegal. Then the next one is we're also going to think about things that are harmful, and so there's a question of, okay, so what constitutes this harm, and then you see, if you go from platform to platform, that list kind of either is small or it grows larger and larger. Now, over the course of late 2020, early 2021, with Twitter, what was so interesting to watch was how their content moderation policy sort of gradually became broader and broader. And this had to do with not only the US elections, so all countries are very concerned about information environments just prior to elections, but it also had to do, of course, with the pandemic. And so one could say, well, it's not in the least bit illegal to say that it would be interesting to experiment with a particular kind of homemade remedy for the coronavirus. But then you could say, well, certain platforms might think that this information could result in self-harm, or this information also could be considered to be false. So what they oftentimes do is they outsource. So then the question is, then the next step is, do we make in-house decisions, or do we outsource them? And during the pandemic in particular, most of the major platforms, they outsourced these decisions to national or international authorities. So they're following this line. So I would say that there's a spectrum to it. I think there's the one other point that I think should be made, and that is that the platforms themselves are not in the business of guaranteeing freedom of speech. So that's not what platforms are about. And so if freedom of speech is not guaranteed there, it's not their problem. That it's, you know what I mean? So their policies could sort of could say, well, we're in favor of that, or we're not, but it's not something, it's not a right that people can claim on a platform. It's a right that people can claim to a state, and sort of in the U.S. context, that's something that's constituted in law vis-a-vis the state, but not vis-a-vis, sort of a business. If the business says you can't, they have particular restrictions, then these are it's not, they're not the state that's making them. So there's also that little aspect to it that I think is interesting to always keep in the back of our minds.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we still, if you allow, we still have time for a couple more questions. I will read one from the Q&A chat, because our viewers also can ask the questions on YouTube and Q&A. So there is a gentleman, Yaroslav Heluk. He is asking a question about anti-Semitic trends. So you stated in your lecture that you noticed different narratives, including the historical ones. And this question is specifically about hashtags, post messages related to the origin of the Ukrainian president, his Jewish heritage, or anything anti-Semitic in the narratives among far-right circles in Poland and Europe. Have you noticed anything about that?
I'm not sure. I think we came across like a few times for something like that, but I think we were pretty sure that it is related to alt-right circles in Polish social media. Once you are a bit once you know a bit what kind of words are used in the circles, you are kind of getting to know this the whole vocabulary. So I think we found few things like that. I don't. Do you remember something specific, Kamila? Because
I don't remember anything specific, but yeah, I think there was nothing specific like that. There was mostly, a litany of different keywords, and that some anti-Semitic keywords would be used and entangled within that message, but there was nothing too specific. I think the historical massacres was the one that was really prominent compared.
Which of course is a bit might be counterintuitive or a bit surprising, but it was not one of the dominant narratives.
Yeah, indeed. So perhaps we still have a room for a final question. So if
yes,
yeah.
I wanted to ask one more question. Do you believe that in the current escalated situation, the Russian special services are able to create a precedent for a conspiracy theory of such a scale as Pizzagate, for example, to compromise Ukrainians?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we could only speculate. What's interesting, the conversation we were having earlier about, the kind of information strategies. So the first thing that should be said is that we did not definitively find a sort of Kremlin influence operation. So that's the first thing that needs to be said. But secondly, any optimization or analytics driven campaigning, right? Influence campaigning or campaigning or strategic communication campaigning does have the potential to sort of create, to create this viral content, right? And so I wouldn't, just purely speculating, that I wouldn't say it's impossible. And the other point is that there's also not only on the content side of sort of which content works, but that's also on the infrastructural side or on the network side. So is there a sort of network in place, whether it's the operatives or the influence campaigners themselves or other channels or users that can be used, sort of like quote unquote useful idiots who then will spread this content. And of course, the goal, and this is something that we're also studying, is the goal is that you can't disentangle the sort of the disinformation campaign with a particular, with a culture, like everyday cultural messaging, cultural commentary. And so that would be the achievement if you can't tell, right? So you can't, and this is what was achieved around before the 2016 US elections, where you had regular users or even organized people in sort of campaigning, people working in politics, sort of spreading kind of Russian messaging. And then you couldn't disentangle the influence campaign from the regular political communication. So when you have that instance where you can't disentangle, that's a kind of sweet spot where you could see these kinds of narratives really resonating. So I would think that would be the information goal of such operations.
Yeah, thank you for your answer, but also for your lecture and your materials. We will spread the word, and also will soon upload this video on YouTube. So I think more people will learn about your fantastic and very timely research. I think we can wrap up. Thank you again, and to all who are watching us online, we are looking forward to host more lectures quite soon. We will have a lecture by Lucan Wei from University of Toronto, who will be speaking about political regimes and regime changes from democracy to autocracy and vice versa. To our guests, thank you, and I look forward to meet you in Ukraine in peaceful times when we will invite you in person to present all your work.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Yeah.
everyone. Bye.
Enjoy. Bye-bye.
Bye.